Excellent. Well,
There you
thank
go.
you all for joining us today. We're excited to present to you a breaking down the non-compete agreements in today's market. Today, I've got Ryan Anderson and John Mateo. I'm Bradley Erb, the Vice President of Growth and Partnerships here at Bow Digital. Just wanted to let everybody know that we are recording this, and you will get the recording after the event is over. And if you have any questions, please use the chat below, and we will make sure we address all of your guys' questions. All right, so I'd like to introduce our guests today. We have John Mateo. John's the president of Jackson and Campbell, a regional law firm based in DC, where he also chairs the firm's business law practice group. Throughout his 35 years of practice, John has negotiated, drafted, enforced, and challenged non-compete agreements across many business sectors, and is here today to share from that experience and provide a current status of the legalities of non-compete agreements at the state and federal level. Ryan Anderson is a founding partner of Anderson Biro Executive Search and Anderson Biro Staffing. Ryan's having over 20 years experience devoted to talent acquisition, Ryan's leadership approach has helped carve out a significant national presence for Anderson Biro in a highly competitive recruiting space. Ryan invests himself personally in the growth and hiring needs of his clients and building long-term relationships with both employers and industry talent. Ryan will be sharing some of his time-tested attraction and retention strategies for both large and small companies, while touching on current workplace trends that may affect recruiting and turnover to the positive. Gentlemen, welcome, and thank you so much for your time today. John, let's start off with you, and how about you give us an intro to non-competes, generally speaking, and kind of give us the lay of the land for where things are at right now.
Sure. So I'll try to be fast because I know we don't have a lot of time. So non-competes are very, very common in the business world. I've drafted literally hundreds of them and defended some and challenged some throughout my career. The industries where they were most common, and frankly still are common, are in the healthcare industry, physician practice groups, hospitals, hospital employees, hospital physicians. They were very common in the financial planning industry, in the brokerage field, in title industry, in real estate, accounting profession. Again, all of them used typical non-competes to preserve the integrity of the business, and those are usually coupled with confidentiality provisions and no shop provisions, meaning that that you anti-rating provisions where you're not going to rate somebody's employees if you leave there, and a combination of all of these. The one industry that they've never been used because they are actually against the code of ethics are for lawyers. Lawyers are not allowed to have them by our professional responsibility code because the client chooses their lawyer, not the other way around. So they've always been disfavored by many states to a greater or lesser degree. The general rule was always that, and continues to be the law, that they need to be reasonable in scope, time, and geography. So if you are a doctor and you're working for a practice and you've got a non-compete that says you will never practice medicine in the United States for 3 years, well, no state's going to enforce that. So what we would do as lawyers is tailor those, and we would say, okay, you will not practice in the area of neurosurgery if the person was a neurosurgeon within a 5 maybe 10-mile radius of any office or hospital to which the practice carries out its business for a period of 2 years. I'd be really comfortable in most states that allow them. But there are certain states that have been chipping away at it. States like Virginia, for example, never liked them, so they would restrict. They were really tougher in interpreting the reasonableness. Other jurisdictions, like in my area, Pennsylvania, Maryland, New York, would not be as strict on some of those as like a state like Virginia or California would be. There are now states that have actually outlawed them. California, which is a leader in a lot of new legislation that trickles on down to other states, because this is a matter of state law. Employment contracting was typically a matter of state law, and it was state by state. So California outlawed them completely in employment. There are some exceptions to that in terms of selling a business, but essentially non-competes are dead in California. Minnesota has put some serious restrictions, as has Oregon. There's a number of states, and if we don't have time to go through everybody, but if people want to reach out to me later, I can sort of get you some of these lists of states where this has occurred. What happened in last year is that the Federal Trade Commission, which governs free trade and practices in the United States, mostly enforces antitrust, they passed a rule which was a complete ban on non-competes in employment, saying that it was an unlawful restraint of trade as a matter of law. So what that meant is that if you had non-competes, they were going to be unenforceable, and you could no longer have them in your employment contracts. There are some exceptions in the final rule from the FTC. For example, if there are senior executives making over $150,000 a year, and they are actually in policy-making positions for the company. So again, they're building in all of these conditions for when they may be acceptable, and it has to really be a powerful figure who's engrossed in the confidential information of the company, making plans, is paid what's considered a high pay. That number is not a mistake. That number is kind of stolen from other rules in the law when it comes to exempt and non-exempt employees and those rules. It also allowed an exception where there was a bona fide sale of a business. So, I've got an accounting practice, you have an accounting practice, you're buying mine, you're paying me lots and lots of money for it. I'm going to agree I'm not going to open up shop next door to you tomorrow after the sale. Those are still permissible. The one other thing the rule did is that, again, I mentioned it outlawed essentially existing non-competes and required companies to let anybody that subject to a current non-compete that they would no longer be enforceable. That does not include confidentiality. You can still have confidentiality provisions, even in these states like California and Oregon and others that have, restricted them completely or put serious parameters around them. Again, it supersedes all laws. So literally the day after the rule was put into, if the final rule was final, the several lawsuits were filed, including one by the United States Chamber of Commerce. 2 jurisdictions now, federal court, have held that they was unlawful and unconstitutional regulation, that the FTC is not in fact authorized under its authorizing legislation to pass law like this. They write regulations, they don't pass laws. The Texas court is the one that most recently acted in earlier, or I guess last month now. Today is October 1st. They had ruled temporarily on a temporary restraining order to enforce it back in July or June. And in September, they ruled finally that it was not going to be enforceable. And so we're now in this position where we've got courts that are throughout federal courts who are in disagreement a bit on this, and it's going to probably work its way through the court. The big challenge right now is, well, what does it mean for us if we have non-competes? And the answer to that, quite honestly, is we're not sure. We think that they're not enforceable, but the court did not say that the FTC could not enforce them nationwide. This is only in Texas jurisdiction. So there's other cases pending. We don't believe the FTC is going to spend lots of time, money, and effort trying to enforce the rule when it's got court battles going on. We think what's going to happen is they are going to fight those battles in court and try to win and have it enforceable. But you've got some pretty powerful lobbying groups, trade associations, and others that are challenging them. So what we're advising clients, when we're writing them, we are continuing to write them with keeping them reasonable in scope, time, and geography, that depending on the jurisdiction we're in. And we have not really advised clients to let people know that they're not going to be enforceable. And I have had one matter in this interim period where we were in fact enforcing a non-compete, and sure enough, the lawyer on the other side, but well, it may not be enforceable. I said, well, the operative word is it may not be, but right now they should still be enforceable. And in fact, the final rule says that if if there was a pending action prior to the rule, those are still going to be able to be prosecuted, if you will, because it happened before the rule. But if you have one that was written before the rule, but there's been no problem until now, their position is that that would be unenforceable. So that's kind of a very, very, very fast lay of the land of where we are now. In all likelihood, more states will probably act, even whether the FTC ban is enforceable or not enforceable. It is more likely that more states will begin to either outlaw them or put parameters around. For example, if they're lower wage employees, like I think it's Oregon or Minnesota that has, it's like $75,000. Anybody making below that can never be subject to a non-compete. So I think they'll continue to be narrowly tailored by lawyers. If the companies are consulting lawyers before they're drafting them and not using their old forms. And, we'll just have to wait on the courts. It's likely that there's enough at stake here for various industries that if there's a split among the federal circuits as to how to enforce this or whether to, that it probably would make its way up to the Supreme Court. So we could be looking at a couple of years before this issue is settled.
Wow. Jonna, thank you so much for starting to untangle this web that we all seem to be operating within. It seems like there's a lot of uncertainty still from state to state in comparison to the federal movement that we've got here. And it seems like there'll be a lot of time that's going to pass before all of the dust finally settles. Ryan, from your perspective, what does this mean for the rest of us? Where does a company like yours that helps in the staffing industry, where do you guys go from here?
Yeah, thanks for the summary, John. Really good stuff. And it seems like you really know what you're talking about in that area. And I know a lot of us were left wondering, especially going forward, what's going to happen. So I think you shed some light on that today. So I really appreciate it. And Brad, thanks so much for hosting. And thanks for having me here. So Ryan Anderson with Anderson Bio Executive Search, Anderson Bio Staffing. So Brad, I think to answer your question, one area that I really want to focus on, really the thrust of everything I'm going to say here for the most part, is around employee retention. Because that's the one thing we can control for the most part, whether you do have a non-compete culture or you don't have a non-compete culture. If you just take all that aside, one thing we can attempt to control as employers is employee retention. And I think one of the reasons why that's so important is essentially turnover is really, really expensive. So everybody has probably heard interesting statistics around this, but I was doing some research the other day and I found one that was frankly a bit startling. But it, according to Gallup, which everybody has probably heard of Gallup, it has an employee turnover costs U.S. businesses alone $1 trillion every year. That's $1 trillion every year, which is probably like 2 days if you're, inflation spending or whatever, but seems like a lot of money still. So the cost of employee turnover varies depending on the level of individual. So for example, the cost for an entry-level person might be somewhere between 30 to 50% of their annual salary to replace. A mid-level person is probably closer to 125 to 150% of their salary. And then a high-level executive or an extremely specialized person could cost as much as 400% of their annual salary to replace. So you can see how that can add up quickly over time. And so ultimately, preventing turnover and really enhancing retention is something that's important for essentially every organization to do, whether or not you have a non-compete policy in place or not. So how do we do this? Let's get into this. First and foremost, it's good to foster a positive work environment, and then set your workplace values in a clear and transparent fashion. So we do this by building a strong company culture. And according to another survey that I found by Deloitte, 88% of employees believe that a distinct workplace culture is important to business success. 88%. So that's significant, I'd say. And essentially, you want to develop a culture that creates a shared sense of purpose, company values, clear mission with which your employees can identify. And this should really start at the time of hire with a robust orientation program. So I think it's important to really take the time to help your new team members, and frankly, even your existing staff, learn where the guide rails are within your organization. So help position them for success. Employee manuals, this is probably an overlooked item, but this is something that every organization really should do if they don't have one in place. Most of our more corporate and larger partners have this ingrained in their culture. Employee manual is just something that happens with robust HR departments every day. But if you're a small business out there, whether you're listening to this now or later, if you don't have your own HR team, you got to find a way to put this in place. You really do need a strong employee manual to help set the guide rails for your team. It can help you prevent a whole host of issues that could really come back and bite you later. So if you don't have something like this in place, you need it at the least a written outline. And you really should prioritize this if you don't have an employee manual or some sort of outline in place today. Back to prioritizing things. So as employers and as businesses, it's good to prioritize your employees' well-being. And you can do this by creating a healthy and supportive work environment that's going to promote their work-life balance. You can foster collaboration and teamwork around your team, help build a sense of belonging and create a sense of community amongst your team. That's good for retention. And if you feel like your company is lacking in this area, you can encourage employee feedback. Ask what they like, ask what they want to hear, ask what they like to see in place. I'm not saying you're gonna have to put everything in place that your team would like, because maybe that's counterproductive in a sense, but certainly there's some good ideas out there that can help you adjust your policies to help keep your team happy and help retain them. All right, so speaking of employees, let's talk a little bit how we invest in their development and their growth, because this is really important for retention. It's a good idea to create a culture of continuous learning. So you want to encourage your team to pursue professional development opportunities like training programs, workshops, certifications. Upscaling is sort of a buzzword right now. It's a trend that's going on in a lot of different environments, but essentially you're teaching folks, you're upskilling their skill set in any particular area. So for example, you might create a training program around the use of AI in your workplace. You might provide tuition reimbursement for higher education, and perhaps communication training is good. We've all, it may be a cliche, but it is what it is. Some of the younger folks in the workforce, maybe because they've had a cell phone since they were 6, have a hard time communicating person to person. And this is really important in business. And so if they need some training around that area, then it's probably not a horrible idea. So you may want to upscale the communication side. So one way to do that is through some form of mentorship program, whether it's formal or informal. So mentorship and coaching. This is really important, especially if you're in a large organization or even a small one. Any type of mentorship can go a long way for various reasons, but essentially you're providing employees an opportunity to learn from more experienced colleagues. So essentially we have right now in today's workforce about 4 generations. So we have obviously your Gen Z, your baby boomers, your millennials, also known as Gen Y, and Gen X. And so a one-size approach to dealing with all these different generations and mindsets is probably not going to be super efficient. So you got to find a way to bridge gaps between the generations. And so with some sort of mentorship program, you can do this. You might pair a baby boomer with a Gen X. You might pair a Gen X with a millennial and a millennial with a Gen Z, and so on. And this will help build bridges between the groups and also could serve to share and preserve institutional knowledge, which is really important in case some of your retention plans don't work. It's good to support career advancement. You want to establish career paths and offer opportunities for promotions or lateral up moves. So help keep your people happier in the long run and give them something for which to strive. And then another newish concept, we talked about a few buzzwords that we're going to talk about today is ESG. And that stands for, as many of you may know, environmental, social, and governance. And companies that care about ESG are often seen as more ethical and attractive to employees. ESG can help you retain top talent, essentially by helping provide purpose, a strong mission, values, and this can help attract employees who share your goals. Social impact is doing good for the world. You know, that can attract employees who care about social issues in particular, showing that you're environmentally conscious. So environmental sustainability, you're being eco-friendly in your business practices and your business decisions, that can be attractive to people, both on your team and from the outside. Ethical business practices, obviously that goes a long way for most folks, unless they're unethical, and then maybe you don't want them on your team anyway. But and then community involvement, you know, really show that you're involved with your community and give back, and how you get that out there is important and can be not only a retention tool but also an attraction tool. So prioritizing ESG can be a good thing for the modern workforce, and that attracts and retains talent. All right, so we're not going to talk about compensation a lot, but because it isn't all about the Benjamins, but it does matter. Why? Well, good, as we all know, and I've been recruiting for well over 20 years in and around this industry, and I'm sure a lot of you on this call or that are going to listen to this later have seen this. Good employees and recruits have many choices. Even B and C candidates are receiving multiple offers these days for key roles. If you're an A candidate and you're the best of the best, you can probably name your price in the open market. And I've seen it, and it's a true thing. So it's important to have at least a competitive compensation plan. And if you can't pay like some of your competitors, for example, which is a very real thing, totally get it, then there's other areas that you can work on to help with retention. But one thing that I should add, and perhaps I'm a little biased because I am a recruiter, but you really need to keep A, B, C in mind. Always be recruiting, because if something happens with one of your key team members, it's good to at least know who is out there that can help fill in an attrition gap. So in order to do that, you really got to be on your ball and know what the competition's doing and who's out there could be available to help. But back to, okay, so we get away from comp. Let's talk about some things that maybe are outside of pure salary or pure bonus. It's good to offer competitive benefits and flexible work policies to the best extent that you can. And you want to conduct regular market research in this area. This will help you ensure that your compensation and your benefit package are competitive with the industry and local standards. And you can adjust this as necessary when possible. Considering a flexible work environment can be good. So for example, remote work, flexible hours, compressed work weeks. This will help meet the needs of some of your employees. This trend has been huge, especially during the pandemic and post-pandemic. Things are starting to trend back to water always finds the level. That's just how it goes. But things are starting to adjust again now back to the way they were pre-pandemic. It's probably going to look a little bit different, I think. My gut is telling me that we're probably going to be trending back from full remote, if you haven't already, to more of a hybrid situation or even 100% in office. But probably the likely bridge to that is like a 3-2 in the office, 2 days from home, or 4-1, 4 days in the office, 1 from home type of setup. But at the very least, if you can't do that, and if you need your people, a lot of companies need your people in the office all the time. That's totally fine. It's good for many reasons. But if you can't let them work from home, or you'd rather not let them work from home, that's okay too. But it's good to have some sort of flexibility around doctor's appointments, childcare, things like that, that you can easily not look the other way on, but create a flexible work environment so people don't feel like that they are reporting to prison every day to work. That's the surest way to lose them. And this is about retention after all. And then on to additional benefits. We want to offer unique benefits that go a little bit beyond the norm. So if you could offer a wellness program, for example, a tuition reimbursement, gym memberships, unlimited PTO has been a hot trend. I'm not sure anybody ever actually uses unlimited PTO, but it is out there. And then an EAP is an employee assistance program. So, for example, there's a lot of different EAP programs, but you might provide a way to help your team with health and wellness. These are typically confidential, voluntary programs, and they're free or low cost to your employees. So they might deal with mental health, substance abuse, work-related stress and other issues, family marital issues, financial legal issues, all kinds of stuff that you could help with. All right, so let's move on to some additional ways to help retain your team. It's a really
Ryan, can I interrupt you, Ryan, with a question?
Yeah, shoot, go ahead, Joe.
In terms of everything you said, I agree with, being in the employment law field too, and running my own firm. But are you seeing with like executive level candidates that you're trying to place? We see a lot of people saying, if I have to go in the office every day, I'm not going to take that. I don't even want to interview. I want flexibility. Every recruiter that we work with tells us, what's your remote work policy? Are you seeing anything in the non-compete area with that higher level, executive level, where they're saying, look, I'm not signing a non-compete under any circumstances? Is that something that is in their heads yet? I mean, are they aware of, this going on in the law? And I just would be curious to know if that's out there.
So, yeah, well, short answer, John, is I've seen it all. And at the end of the day, it really is relative to the value of the individual in question. But that only goes so far, because there's a lot of prima donnas, so to speak, that have a lot of value that sometimes the companies just said, I've had enough. Go do whatever you want. It's not worth keeping you around. It's not worth paying you, this type of thing. But in general, everything is negotiable. I have many clients that have fairly robust non-compete programs in place. And even they, if pushed hard enough for the right person, will make exceptions. And then the remote thing, to answer your question directly, I think it's an evolving situation. We've seen it recently. Amazon, for example, is asking people to come back into the office.
Right.
And they're putting their foot down on it. Now, that might be a way to cut costs. It might just be that they really actually want people back in the office, or a combination of both. But I think that there is a lot of resistance. I have many friends that own businesses that really would like their people back in the office, but are having a hard time pulling the trigger on it for one reason or another. I think it is slowly evolving back to the way it used to be pre-pandemic. And there's going to be pockets of air, John, depending on who you are, where you are, and everything is relative to the individual. But yes, it is starting to become there's a more heat on coming back to the office for sure. And that can be used as a negotiating tool.
Interesting. I like that everything is negotiable and on the table, from the non-compete side all the way to the recruitment, and then the retention of those employees from the executive level on down. And in an effort to make sure that we stay on time after our late start, I wanted to go ahead and thank both of you, Ryan and John, for your time today. And everybody that was able to join, and everyone that's able to see this recording, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to John Matteo and Ryan Anderson about non-competes, where we're at in today's market, legally, from the national and state level, all the way down to how to retain your employees so that you hopefully don't have to worry about enforcing these moving forward. Like I said at the beginning, this recording will be sent out to everyone that signed up and registered. If you have any further questions, you can direct them to Ryan and John, and their email addresses will be included with the delivery of this recording. So again, thank you, Ryan. Thank you, John, so much for your time today. Everybody,
Thank you
for coming on and watching, and look forward to some more questions being followed.
Great.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much,
everyone.
Brad.
Thanks for hosting, Bradley. Bye-bye.
Thanks, John. Good luck, everybody.